I've been supplementing our positive psychology discussion with some readings on Zen and well, like I hit up Bruce Lee's Tao Jeet Kune Do, and
Cool.
because I heard that the first chapter is on, it's called On Zen, and it's just some of his ideas and writing about it, and also some Western thought on stress and stress management that kind of just popped into my life through my sister.
Okay.
And yeah, so I think it's definitely pulled me in interesting new directions and makes me want to hear even more about your experience getting into Buddhism.
All right, yeah, we could chat about that. Another book I'd recommend on the stress response that I think is really well written is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
By Robert Sapolsky.
Yeah, I don't feel
I'll check that one out.
that's really good to just put everything into perspective, and just show how the stress response is. It's basically the whole body is involved, and how many systems are involved, but how interconnected we can be just by looking at stress, right? So, like, I think stress is actually a good way to look at the interconnectedness of the body.
Okay.
And I think the word stress oftentimes is just like, it's bastardized in a way. It's like people just throw it around. But when you read that book, it kind of helps you appreciate what you might be meaning by the stress response, like that there's a physiological way to look at that that's just different than the way I just happen to be stressed, like, so I think that that's useful because it I think it does play a huge role in what I see as a physical therapist, but what can lead to some chronic conditions for a lot of people. And it's not that there's an easy treatment, but just to understand how everything can be connected through how we manage stress can be very useful.
Yeah. Well, how do you use the word stress? What do you refer to exactly?
So first of all, I wouldn't want to look at stress as like a bad thing all the time, right? It's something that's absolutely necessary, and it's part of like what we deal with, right? So we have physical stress every time we try to train something in exercise or in physical therapy. Like, we're promoting physical stress to the tissues, to the body, to the nervous system, so that the body can adapt to that physical stress and then be able to tolerate or be more resilient to more stress, right? So stress isn't a bad thing. It's just a thing that has a response, or the body, has a response to it. So we have to just be aware of some of the ways that if things go too much in one direction, what that looks like, and then what does it look like to go in the other direction. And I think that's very similar to what we talked about with the fight or flight response versus the rest and digest response. So whenever those two systems are discussed, it tends to be very extreme. It's like, what's the end game, kind of like most extreme rest and digest feeling? Well, it's like totally in this Zen meditation state versus the end game of being just kind of a type A personality where you just can't sleep in the fight or flight state. But there's all of this in between, and really being able to look at stress as a sliding scale continuum can be very helpful, because a lot of times you are just trying to manipulate stress to get the most out of your behaviors and to get the most out of your health.
Yeah, actually, hearing you describe it, it's funny to think that both extremes could exist and often do in a single person.
Yeah. But from an education standpoint, it's often helpful to use extremes to get the idea, the dichotomy. But we just have to make sure we don't forget that that's not like how things are in real life. Like, there's always this sliding scale that we have to be able to work with.
Yeah. So how did you get into Buddhism? I remember you mentioning you attended some meditation sessions in Philly, in the city, but like, how did these ideas get into your life? And
I've always had like an affinity, I would say, for Eastern culture. I don't know why, but I just kind of always thought like that was cool. Like when I was younger, like ninja movies and anything that was sort of wrapped around that culture, having no concept of like really the depth of it. But I just like always like wanted to look into more stuff along those lines. So I just started, reading about Buddhism, I would say when I was 25, 26, just because I was like curious. Right. And
You
I
remember
just
any
thought,
specific books?
yeah, I think I actually have it on the bookshelf here. It's, and it's, I wouldn't say it's like a great book, but it's like Introduction to Buddhism. And it
Okay.
was by Geshe Kelsang Gyatso. But I just remember that being the first book that I ever read on Buddhism. And, it was simple, but also it had a lot of the like Buddhist ritual in it. And for me, if for some reason that didn't turn me off to it, you know what I mean? I'm not like a super religious person at all. I grew up in a kind of Lutheran, like with a Lutheran Christian background, went to church sometimes, but really not a real religious household, which is, I appreciate. Like there was no pushing me to look at one thing one way. But I'll just say like that growing up and going to like Sunday school and being confirmed in a religion, it never really made sense to me. But I would just kind of do it as something that other people I knew did, and my family did. But when I read about Buddhism, it didn't seem like a religion the way that I had learned about religion growing up, where it wasn't like faith oriented. It seemed more like psychology oriented, like where you would actually do the work of just exploring these concepts and seeing them unfold for themselves, instead of having somebody who you're supposed to respect for some reason tell you what's right and what's wrong. I felt like Buddhism always struck me as something that was more experience oriented. And meditation was the way to get more experience. So I had a little bit of trust in the process when I read that. And I've realized now that not everybody has that same experience, right? So if you read the same book, you may not have the same experience, but I've certainly found with my clients and patients that are interested in meditation, the things that spoke to me do not speak to them in the same way. So, but I was always found like it's something that spoke to me because I didn't feel like I had to have a lot of faith, and it was more like something I could explore and realize, like have like more true realizations, as opposed to having to just listen to something that I didn't feel like made sense, but somebody was telling me that's the way it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it just became something that, as I started meditating more and more with the principles that I was contemplating and keeping in mind, I started to see more of those principles unfold and just like, daily life in a way. And that I felt like the practice was very worthy of my time. And I think when I was 25, I didn't have kids yet. I wasn't even quite married yet. I had a little bit more free time to delve into some like weekend meditation retreats and just, get into some of that culture a little bit. And I felt very comfortable there, where it was like, I felt like I was doing something that was good for myself. And I felt like a better person in many ways than what I felt like I was before. And better in a way that I just felt like I was working on stuff that I was never even thinking about before. And I think that because one of the main concepts of Buddhism that I really like and try to figure out ways that there's a deeper truth to it is the concept of non-judgment. So even just this idea of saying like better or worse, like looking a little deeper at that. But as I describe what I like better about me exploring that was that it was actually something I wasn't even thinking about before, right? Just so it was just like there was a process that I was involved in that I wasn't involved in before. So it was allowing me to just look at the world much, much differently than I ever did. And I just thought that was something that was very useful, and I wanted to do more of it. And I would say as I've kind of expanded my practice, I do a lot less of the formal stuff just from a time perspective. But I try to connect some of the Buddhist principles more to some of the neuropsychology that's coming out about meditation now, or just even the positive psychology that we talked about, like stuff that's being studied more in, a Western medicine type of way of study, and how that all connects. And that's what I'm sort of fascinated with now, because I see that these ancient practices have a lot wisdom to it that are actually just being studied now. But we also want to really appreciate the new information and not just say like, well, the traditional ways had it right. We want to learn from what the technology that we have, the way that we can look at the brain now and connect it to physiology. So like, I'm fascinated with all that. And I do see like some of these common threads of Buddhism in so much of the positive psychology research, some of the neuroimmunology research, just like what makes people happy, but also like what improves well-being from an immune system standpoint. It just seems to be in that wisdom there.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So it started with curiosity for you, huh?
It did, and I'll one thing I kind of left out, and I wouldn't say that it was completely directly linked, but I had around 26, I gave up drinking alcohol. So I drank a lot when I was in college, and I made a decision to give that up when I was around 26. But I actually started reading about Buddhism a little bit before that, and I remember that because part of what I was reading was to renounce certain things and get the experience of what that renunciation is. And alcohol was consistently talked about, and I knew it was like something that I was doing that wasn't consistent with other things I was doing in my life. So I don't know if that helped, but it certainly, when I made the decision to give it up, I think it definitely helped to keep me in that decision, right? To not go back to drinking in that way of life, just because I had some other way of looking at the world that I wasn't looking at the world before when I was drinking excessively. But it wasn't like that, where the first book I read, like I gave up booze. I just think it helped when I made that decision to have another practice that I can go to, a spiritual practice. The idea of something, looking at myself as like not the center of the universe. Like that's the one thing where I think many spiritual practices have that, but like it doesn't have to be a specific deity in my mind. It could just be like just this concept of egolessness, and then just to look deeper into what that means. But that was really useful when I was trying to give up alcohol. I felt like it made the process so much smoother because I had this meditation practice, and just I was reading about the Dharma and all of these concepts that helped me look at myself a little differently.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a different style of cognition altogether. Mm-hmm. This philosophy, and like trying on these ideas, or just running the words through my head as I read some of the way Bruce Lee has phrased these ideas. It feels like it requires me to not think about it the way I normally do in order to begin to understand.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, you have to explore the stuff that are natural patterns, right? And I think that's one of the tenets of meditation, really, is just that you're an observer of your mind in a way. You're an observer of your habits, and you get more control when you can observe, right? Instead of being lost in them, right? Like if you don't have any space between you and your behaviors, you just are your behaviors, right? Like you're just basically doing the same stuff without as much control of it. But meditation gives you some space to really look at that, look at your thoughts, like look at what you think is intuitive and common sense, and looking deeper at that, right? And sometimes things become, they become clear just by stepping back and giving yourself that space. And then sometimes you actually have to purposely contemplate the opposite of your thoughts, sometimes like the opposite of what you think is common, and that contemplative meditation becomes very valuable too, where it's like, I think this is true, how can I disprove that? Is there a way to disprove it? And like just really not believing yourself on a regular basis in a way, and being able to, there's got to be something deeper than my intuition, and that is like, it's an ongoing practice that you don't really have to share with anyone else. It's between like you and you, but it is a mindset to allow you to look at things differently all the time, right? Like, and look at the concept of right and wrong differently, look at the concept of morality differently. And I definitely think it helps you become a better learner to have this consistent openness. But that doesn't mean gullibility or naivete. It's more just, okay, like, can that be looked at a different way? Because I would look at the same way that I'm questioning myself, I would question a guru or a teacher. But it can be internal. I don't have to call them out. It would just be like, okay, I see what I'm getting from them. I see this is new information, this is value, but is there another way to look at it, or where are they coming from, right? Like, so it's I think a very useful thing to have that practice of questioning, but not discounting and not being so skeptical that you think you know more than the person that's bringing you new information, right? And that's its own skill, which I think is a part of what meditation offers.
So that is the idea of, I guess, understanding, or maybe I guess it relates to this idea of true knowledge and kind of being colorless with your perceptions, like just trying to explore how things are really.
Yeah.
So you take something you assume to be true and explore how it might not be.
Yeah.
But are there other?
And I think a big principle that at least I've taken from Buddhism, and again, people will adapt things differently to, I think, fit like what makes sense to them, but is that instead of thinking of things as like inherently true, inherently like right or wrong, it's just like you have to look at things based on relationships, where like everything, the way that we think is in some way shaped by the causes and conditions of our lives to this point, right? And part of that is genetic, part of that is the environment that we're in, but we can't discount that at any point. But we tend not to contemplate that every time we make a decision, which is a good thing. Like, we don't want to have to think about everything that's led up to the decision we're making. We have to make decisions on a regular basis, but to take some time to step back and realize, like, why am I so strong with this conviction? Where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from your history in some way, right? The person that you listened to, the person that you've read, the environment you grew up in, the genetics of your neurological makeup, right? Like, all of those things are always at play. So there isn't necessarily like a right and wrong to that. There is just a bunch of relationships that are happening. So the more you are able to see and be able to kind of fall back into that concept of, where are the relationships that make me feel this way, right? It makes you not hold on to them so tightly as if they are like definitely right and definitely true, because you have to appreciate that every other person has different causes and conditions, right? And in that way, like, everyone has a different way of being for certain reasons. So you can try to have a discussion where you explain something from your perspective, but that perspective is going to always be based on your causes and conditions, which maybe is part of education, to spread that to somebody else, but it's not inherently right or wrong. It's just based on information that you've gathered over your years that tend to make sense. And if you can persuade somebody to also view it the same way you do, that doesn't make it right either. That just means that you were persuasive enough to have now that is part of their causes and conditions, the education that you just added into their lives, right? So I just think of it as, whenever you can kind of take some of the finite nature out of phenomena, it's a useful thing, because it helps you be able to change easier or roll with change easier, and that's another big principle, is like the impermanence of phenomena, like that the things that we stress the most about, we tend to put some type of permanent type of mark on, where oftentimes it doesn't have that permanence. So the deeper you can look at that concept of impermanence, the easier it is to roll with change and accept what comes.
You actually describe in the book, or not describe, but you mention encountering impermanence in this like raw experience while maybe practicing Tonglen or another meditation practice. does that experience or any like that come to mind?
Yeah, I think that may have been when I was describing the patient stillness practice, just at looking at, the impermanence of the physical sensations that you feel if you don't immediately like react and try to eradicate them, that they kind of go away themselves or they change themselves, right? And when it comes to physical pain, especially connected to some type of orthopedic diagnosis, a lot of times that orthopedic diagnosis looks static, and therefore the pain becomes static or it worsens over time, because the assumption would be that as I get older, I'm going to worsen. So there's no way that this pain can do anything but worsen, right? So there's this mind state that says progressive deterioration in a linear fashion. But
Yeah.
sitting and noticing will show you something different. It can do that in a small sample, where so if you sit for 20 minutes, you'll notice all the changes of sensation if you are paying attention, that demonstrate to you that there is not a linear progression of worsening of your pain.
Yeah.
In any moment. There is a change of your pain. So then you would have to take that sample of what you experienced during your meditation and say, okay, how does this extrapolate into the grander mind state that I have about my pain, in my chronic pain, my arthritis, right? Is it as finite as I think it is, or as I've been told it is, or as my x-ray makes it seem to be? Or is there a different way to look at it?
I could see how just exploring more nuance like that could itself be a paradigm shift, but at least it totally reframes the way you could think about disease or a condition that
Right.
you've had labeled on you.
And that doesn't take away from, the treatments that are offered, right? But I think that becomes clearer too, to know a path to take that maybe wasn't there before, but it'll shows like, well, like, yeah, I see it change, but it's still uncomfortable, right? It's not maybe what I thought it was, but if there's something that makes me not even have to think about it anymore, if there's a treatment for that, yeah, I'm going to do it. But a lot of times there's not, and that's where when there's like these chronic states, that meditation is really valuable, because you have to start to look at your own way of perceiving things. And if you don't, that leads to a cycle that there's evidence that shows that your prognosis is worse and things like that. So, are you familiar with the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset research and all that? So, when I hear that research, I just think like the first thing that comes to my mind is meditation in many ways. Because if I want to improve myself, and in my experience as a human, like the thing that I feel like has been the most valuable for self-improvement is a meditation practice. And I exercise a lot, and I'm in that health world of eating differently and all that, but like meditation, I just feel like trumps all of that, because it just allows you to look at every situation differently, right? It's not like, oh, I'm good if I exercise, like I'm good if I eat a certain way. It's like, I feel like with meditation, it's like, I'm good, period. Like if that's on point, like I just feel like it's hard to disrupt that. All right, but it's an ongoing practice, right? Like, so I just think that that's the most worthy practice that there is in many ways, is to get your mind state in a better place on a regular basis, right? Because when I say a better place, it's not like it stops there. It's like you have that practice, that ongoing practice should be something that is in your game, because it's really worth your time, because I can't imagine anything that would be more worth your time.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Bruce Lee's words on Zen chapter, where he basically urges everyone to focus on cultivating the entity that unites all the different departments, I think are his exact words. But I understood that I interpreted it as he's telling everyone to like get your orientation straight, cultivate Zen, cultivate kind of all these, how you view everything, how you view your opponent,
right?
More so than your jabs or your crosses.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really couldn't speak to how that, goes to martial arts, because that's, I'm very, very novice with any of that, but I can imagine how it would be huge for, just to be able to just see what's going on around you from a different place. Like if you're cultivating that and you're cultivating your bodily skill at the same time, and just also being able to have more control over your emotions when you're, be in a situation where you have to fight for your life, or, even if it's competitive, but certainly if it was like you had to fight for your life, there maybe is some value to just responding in a sympathetic way. That's part of what the fight or flight response is about, is like to fight or flee and get away from danger. But a lot of times, if you have a little bit more control of your decisions, and you're well trained, you also have to be well trained physically at the same time. You just might be able to see things a little clearer in a fight, in combat. I just can't really speak to that, but I can see how that would be like, that would totally make a lot of sense, and how it would all be interconnected. I could totally see that with sport, and I can see that even with training, like just physical training, to have more awareness of your body with everything you do. That's a practice that you can do just with movement, but it certainly can be enhanced with just stillness in a more seated meditation practice. And then whenever you're, moving in a way that you need to really be aware of technique and posture, it becomes easier to do that because your mind is used to just looking at your body, looking deeper at your physical sensations.
Okay, interesting. I'll try that one out.
All right. I got to get to a client, but no, this was I think a good conversation. I don't know. It's like, I'm glad you asked the questions, because I haven't really thought about it from when I started, the whole process along those lines. It's definitely evolved into something else. But I think the whole like current culture around the term meditation and mindfulness, and even Buddhism, how that fits, it's all changed in the last, I guess it's over a decade now. Yeah. So it's cool to revisit that. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, no worries. There's a lot to unpack here.